Something about you has changed, and your soulmate may have noticed it before you ever realized they were paying attention. Perhaps they recently saw you, heard something about your life, or came across a glimpse of the person you are becoming, and for a moment, they may have felt strangely unfamiliar with someone they once thought they knew completely. You still look like you. Your voice may still sound the same. Your memories together haven't disappeared. And yet something about your energy feels different. You seem calmer, more certain, less interested in proving yourself, less willing to chase what once kept you emotionally unsettled. That difference may have caught your soulmate completely off guard, because they may have expected you to remain exactly where they left you emotionally. They may have assumed that if they ever looked back, they would find the same version of you, the one who cared deeply, waited patiently, questioned everything, and perhaps secretly hoped they would eventually understand. But instead, they are beginning to see someone who has learned how to move forward without needing anyone's permission. And that realization can be surprisingly powerful. Imagine returning to a familiar place after years away and discovering that the building is still there, but everything inside has been transformed. You recognize the structure, yet you realize you no longer understand the world inside it. That may be what your soulmate is experiencing with you right now. They may be looking at your life and wondering when this transformation happened, what caused it, and why they didn't notice it sooner. But the deeper question may be even more uncomfortable. Did you change because of everything that happened between you? Because if they begin connecting your growth to the past, they may realize they are not simply seeing a different version of you. They are seeing the result of everything you survived, learned, and finally chose to leave behind. The change your soulmate noticed may have seemed small at first, but the more they think about it, the more they may realize that it represents something much deeper. They may have expected you to still react to things the way you once did. Perhaps they thought you would still be emotionally affected by their silence, still wonder what they were thinking, or still care deeply about whether they approved of the choices you were making. But what they are seeing now may be completely different. You seem less concerned with being understood by everyone around you. You may no longer feel the need to explain why you walked away, why you became quieter, or why certain things no longer matter to you. And that can be incredibly surprising to someone who remembers the old version of you. Your soulmate may begin comparing the person they knew with the person they are seeing now, and the contrast may become impossible to ignore. Before, perhaps you gave people endless opportunities to explain themselves. Now you may simply observe their actions and make your decision. Before, you may have spent hours wondering whether someone cared. Now you may understand that genuine care doesn't require constant guessing. Before, you may have been willing to hold on to something because of the memories attached to it. Now you may recognize that memories can be meaningful without becoming reasons to remain stuck. This is the kind of transformation that can make someone stop and rethink everything they believed about you. Your soulmate may have assumed that your heart would always remain connected to the past in the same way, but they are beginning to see that you can remember someone without waiting for them. You can still appreciate what happened without allowing it to control where you go next. And perhaps that is what they never expected. They may have imagined your growth as something temporary, something that would eventually lead you back to the person you used to be. Instead, they are seeing that your growth has become part of your identity. Imagine knowing someone as a particular song, then hearing that same song years later and realizing the melody is familiar. But the meaning has completely changed because you are no longer the person who first heard it. Your soulmate may be experiencing something similar. The memories are still there, but their understanding of you is changing. They may suddenly recognize qualities they didn't appreciate before. Your independence may look different to them now. Your silence may no longer seem like distance. Your boundaries may no longer seem like rejection. Even your decision to focus on yourself may appear less like you were running away and more like you were finally returning to yourself. And that realization can make them wonder how much of your transformation happened quietly while they weren't paying attention. They may remember moments when you were trying to communicate something important, but they didn't fully understand. They may remember times when you needed reassurance, consistency, or simply someone willing to meet you emotionally where you were. Perhaps they assumed you would always remain patient because you cared. Perhaps they didn't realize that patience has limits when a person continually feels misunderstood. Now, when they look at you, they may see the result of those experiences. Not someone who became cold, but someone who learned discernment. Not someone who stopped caring, but someone who learned that caring for another person cannot come at the expense of caring for themselves. This can create an uncomfortable realization for your soulmate, because they may begin wondering whether they helped create the very transformation they are now admiring. Maybe their distance taught you independence. Maybe their inconsistency taught you not to settle for uncertainty. Maybe their silence taught you that you could survive without receiving every answer you wanted. They may not have intended to teach you those lessons, but life has a way of turning painful experiences into permanent changes. And now they may be looking at you, thinking about the person you were when they first knew you and wondering how that person became so different. The answer may be simpler than they expect. You didn't suddenly become someone else. You became more aware of yourself. You learned what drains you. You learned what deserves your energy. You learned that not every connection needs to be chased until it makes sense. You learned that sometimes walking away is not giving up on love. It is refusing to give up on yourself. Your soulmate may find that especially difficult to process because they may have once believed your attachment to them was proof that you would always remain emotionally available. Now they may be realizing that your love never meant you would stop growing. And perhaps the most surprising part is that your transformation doesn't require you to hate them. You can still care. You can still remember. You can still acknowledge the importance of what you shared. But you may no longer be willing to abandon your peace just to preserve an old connection. That distinction can completely change the way they see you. They may start wondering whether the person they remember would even recognize the choices you make today. They may wonder what you would say if they approached you now. They may wonder whether you would still be as emotionally open as you once were, or whether you would simply listen and decide based on what they actually show you. And that uncertainty may be what makes your transformation so powerful to them, because they can no longer predict your response using the version of you they remember. The old patterns may not work anymore. The old assumptions may not apply anymore. And slowly, your soulmate may be realizing that the person they once thought they understood was only one chapter of who you are. The person standing before them now carries everything you learned afterward. And that means, if they want to understand you again, they may have to stop looking backward and finally pay attention to who you have become. What your soulmate may not realize yet is that your transformation didn't happen overnight. It was built through moments they may never have witnessed, moments when you had to quietly choose yourself after realizing that certain patterns could no longer continue. And now, when they look at you differently, they may begin connecting the dots between who you were and who you have become. They may remember how easily you once gave people the benefit of the doubt, how often you tried to understand before judging, and how willing you were to keep holding on to something even when it was emotionally exhausting. Perhaps they once interpreted that as weakness, or assumed you would always be there no matter how uncertain things became. But now, they may finally understand that your patience was never unlimited. You were simply willing to believe in people until their actions gave you a reason not to. And somewhere along the way, something changed. You learned to stop chasing explanations from people who weren't ready to give them. You learned that silence can sometimes be an answer. You learned that someone can matter deeply to you and still not be healthy for the life you are trying to build. That realization may be what surprises your soulmate the most, because they may have expected your transformation to make you bitter. Instead, you became calmer. They may have expected you to become emotionally unavailable, but instead you became more selective about where you place your energy. They may have expected you to keep looking backward, but instead you began building a future that didn't require anyone from your past to validate it. Imagine watching a tree survive a season that seemed determined to strip away every leaf, only to see it return stronger when the weather changes. The tree didn't become a different species. It simply adapted to what it had experienced. Your soulmate may now be realizing that your strength came from adaptation too. Everything you went through taught you something about yourself, about love, about boundaries, and about what you will no longer accept. And perhaps this is where their own regret begins to appear. They may wonder whether they ever truly saw the person you were when they had the opportunity. Maybe they focused too much on what you gave them and not enough on what it cost you. Maybe they noticed your affection but overlooked your emotional effort. Maybe they assumed that because you were strong enough to stay through difficult moments, you would always remain willing to do so. Now, they may understand that strength doesn't mean someone should have to keep tolerating the same pain. Your growth may therefore feel like a mirror to them. It reflects the moments they could have handled differently and the opportunities they may have taken for granted. They may remember times when you were asking for very little, but still didn't receive it consistently. They may remember conversations they avoided because they didn't want to face uncomfortable emotions. They may remember how you gradually became quieter and wonder whether that was the beginning of the transformation they are now noticing. And perhaps the hardest realization is that you didn't need a dramatic ending to change. Sometimes a person changes after quietly reaching the point where they realize they cannot keep abandoning themselves for the sake of preserving a connection. Your soulmate may now understand that your distance wasn't necessarily about punishing them. It was about protecting the person you were becoming. That distinction could completely change their perception of the past. They may start seeing certain moments differently. What they once called your stubbornness may now look like boundaries. What they once called your silence may now look like emotional maturity. What they once thought was you pulling away may now look like you finally learning when to stop chasing. And the more they understand, the more they may wonder whether they still deserve access to this newer version of you. Because the person you are becoming may have different standards. You may no longer respond to empty promises or inconsistent effort in the same way. You may listen to words, but you pay much closer attention to actions. You may still have a soft heart, but you no longer hand that softness to everyone without discernment. And your soulmate may find that deeply attractive while simultaneously realizing how much has changed. They may admire your confidence while wondering whether they could ever recreate the trust that once existed between you. They may be proud of the person you have become, while privately regretting that they weren't more present during the process. And this is where their view of you begins shifting from familiarity to genuine recognition. They may finally understand that you were never simply the person who loved them, waited for them, or tried to make the connection work. You were always someone with your own path, your own strength, and your own future. They just didn't see all of it before. Now they are beginning to, and once they see that clearly, they may realize that the biggest change in you wasn't that you stopped caring about the past. It was that the past stopped having the power to decide your future. Your soulmate may now be reaching a point where simply noticing your transformation is no longer enough. They may be starting to understand what that transformation actually means, and that can completely change the way they see you. Before, they may have looked at your silence and assumed you were still emotionally attached to the past. Now they may be realizing that your silence could have come from peace rather than longing. They may have believed that your distance meant you were hurt and waiting for something to change, but now they are beginning to see that you may have created an entirely different life around yourself. You aren't necessarily trying to make anyone regret losing you. You aren't trying to prove that you are doing better. You may simply have reached a point where your happiness no longer depends on whether someone from your past recognizes your value. And that realization can be surprisingly powerful for your soulmate. Imagine watching someone you once knew as emotionally dependent on a particular outcome suddenly become completely comfortable with uncertainty. They don't need to know what someone else is thinking. They don't need to chase closure. They don't need to force a conversation that isn't naturally happening. They simply continue moving forward. That may be the version of you your soulmate is beginning to see now, and it may leave them wondering how they ever misunderstood you so deeply. They may start noticing that your confidence doesn't look forced. You aren't constantly announcing how much you've changed. Your actions may simply show it. You may be more selective about who you trust. You may no longer react immediately when someone disappoints you. You may have learned to walk away from situations that once would have consumed your attention. And perhaps most importantly, you may have stopped measuring your worth by whether someone chooses you. That can create a powerful reversal in your soulmate's perception. They may once have believed you were waiting for them to make a decision. Now they may be wondering whether you would even choose them if they came back. That question can quietly stay in their mind because they no longer have the certainty they once had. They may remember the person who used to care so deeply about their attention and compare that person with the one they see now. The difference may be uncomfortable because it proves that your life continued even when they were no longer at the center of it. They may begin to wonder what you experienced while they were absent. What did you learn? Who helped you grow? What moments forced you to become stronger? What did you have to overcome privately? And perhaps they realize they know far less about your current life than they once assumed. That can create curiosity, but it can also create a sense of loss. Because when someone changes deeply, the person who knew them before the transformation doesn't automatically know the person they become afterward. Your soulmate may feel that gap now. They may recognize your face, remember your history, and still feel like there are entire parts of you they haven't met yet. And that can make them see you with fresh eyes. They may admire the maturity in the way you carry yourself. They may notice that you don't seem interested in unnecessary drama. They may see that you have become more intentional with your time and energy. They may even recognize that you seem lighter than before. Not because your past didn't matter, but because you stopped allowing it to control your present. This is where admiration can become emotionally complicated. Your soulmate may genuinely be happy that you have grown, while another part of them may feel unsettled by what your growth means for them. If you have changed this much without them, then what place would they have in your life now? Would you still recognize the connection? Would you trust them again? Would you even want the same things you once wanted? They may not know the answers, and that uncertainty can make them think about you more than they expected. They may start wondering whether the opportunity they once had is still available. Perhaps they once assumed that no matter how much time passed, they could return and find you emotionally standing in the same place. Now they may understand that time doesn't freeze people. It changes them. You may have developed boundaries they never saw before. You may have learned to communicate differently. You may have stopped accepting half-hearted effort. And if they ever wanted to reconnect, they might have to approach you with a completely different level of honesty. The old dynamic may no longer work because you are no longer participating in it. That is why your transformation can affect them so deeply. It forces them to recognize that you didn't simply become more confident. You became more conscious of what you deserve. You may still have the same heart, but you have learned where that heart belongs and where it doesn't. Your soulmate may begin to realize that they were not watching you disappear. They were watching you evolve. And perhaps the most unexpected part of all is that the person they once thought they had figured out may now be someone they genuinely want to understand again. They may start looking at you with curiosity instead of assumptions, respect instead of familiarity, and perhaps even a little fear because they can no longer predict what you will do next. And once someone realizes they can no longer rely on the old version of you, they are forced to confront a difficult truth. If they want a place in your future, they may have to meet the person you are now, rather than expecting you to become the person you used to be. And perhaps now your soulmate is finally beginning to understand the real reason your transformation affected them so deeply. It wasn't simply because you looked different, acted differently, or seemed more confident than before. It was because they suddenly realized that the person they had been remembering for so long was only a version of you. And while they were holding on to that version, you were quietly becoming someone much stronger. They may have expected you to remain emotionally connected to everything that happened between you, but instead, you learned how to carry those memories without allowing them to control your future. You may still remember what you shared. You may still appreciate the moments that mattered. You may even still have feelings that you don't talk about. But there is a difference between remembering someone and waiting for them, and your soulmate may finally be seeing that difference. Perhaps this is why they are looking at you differently now. They may realize that you didn't become distant because you stopped having a heart. You became more careful because you finally understood how valuable that heart was. You stopped giving unlimited access to people who only offered temporary effort. You stopped confusing potential with reality. You stopped believing that loving someone meant continuously proving your loyalty while receiving uncertainty in return. And that realization may make your soulmate look back at the past with completely different eyes. They may remember the moments when you were trying to communicate, the moments when you were hoping for consistency, and the moments when you stayed, even though something inside you was telling you that you deserved more. They may wonder how many signs of your eventual transformation they missed because they were too comfortable with the version of you who kept giving them chances. Perhaps they thought your patience meant you would never leave emotionally. Now, they may understand that patience can eventually become clarity. When someone repeatedly experiences the same disappointment, they don't always become colder. Sometimes they simply become wiser. Your soulmate may now be noticing that wisdom in you. They may see that you don't react to everything anymore. You choose your battles. You protect your peace. You don't feel the same need to convince someone of your worth because you already know it yourself. And that can create a completely different kind of attraction. Not the attraction that comes from chasing someone who is unavailable, but the attraction that comes from realizing someone has developed a strength you once underestimated. Your soulmate may begin wondering whether the person they knew before would have handled today's challenges the way you do now. They may realize that the version of you they once took for granted has grown into someone they would have to approach with greater honesty, greater respect, and much more intention. And perhaps that is the part they find hardest to accept. Your transformation means they can no longer rely on the old emotional patterns between you. They can't assume that you will automatically respond the way you once did. They can't assume that memories alone will reopen every door. They can't assume that because you once cared deeply, you will always be willing to accept the same circumstances. If they ever come back into your life, they may have to meet you where you are now. And maybe they are beginning to understand that this is not a punishment. It is simply the natural result of everything you have learned. You didn't change to make them regret losing you. You changed because life required you to become stronger. You changed because there were parts of yourself you had neglected while trying to keep other people comfortable. You changed because eventually you realized that your peace deserved the same protection you had always given to everyone else's emotions. And now your soulmate may be seeing the result of that decision. They may look at you and feel a strange combination of admiration, curiosity, nostalgia, and uncertainty. They may wonder whether they still have a place in your world. They may wonder whether you would recognize the person they are today as well. And perhaps, for the first time, they may understand that your story did not stop when the connection became distant. Your life continued. You grew, you learned, you rebuilt parts of yourself they never got to see. The person they remember is still part of you, but they are no longer the whole story. And that may be the realization that stays with them the longest. They didn't suddenly discover that you became someone else. They discovered that you became more completely yourself. The qualities they are noticing now were always somewhere inside you, but circumstances forced you to bring them forward. And perhaps that is why they are seeing you differently. They are finally looking beyond the version of you that existed in their memories and beginning to recognize the person standing in front of them now. Whether they choose to approach that person again is something only they can decide. But one thing may already be clear. They can no longer look at you through the same eyes they used before. Because the person they once thought would always be waiting has learned how to move forward. And the person they once believed they understood has become someone they may now have to genuinely earn the chance to understand again.